For Elias Thorne, the silent majesty of the North Cascades held no secrets. Every rock and tree was an open book to him. Every river seemed to know his name. He understood this land, this wild, rugged beauty, better than he knew himself, certain that no change could catch him off guard. Yet even his deep knowledge and years of experience could not prepare him for what lay ahead, for a trial that would test his bond with this land to its very core. Elias, a man in his mid-50s, was carved from the same granite as the peaks around him. His lean, wiry frame belied a remarkable strength, honed by decades of relentless labor. His gait was silent, measured, as if he were an extension of the forest itself, its ancient guardian. His weathered, sun-tanned face bore the marks of countless sunrises and sunsets spent under the open sky. Deep lines around his gray eyes mapped his life, while his piercing, calm gaze rivaled that of a raptor. His neatly trimmed, silver-flecked beard lent him the air of a sage or hermit. His scarred, calloused hands were tools capable of both repairing a broken machine and gently tending to an injured animal. He lived in a sturdy, small cabin, 2 days' trek from the nearest town of Ridgewood, with only the silence of the mountains and the ceaseless whisper of pines as his constant companions. He knew this land demanded vigilance, and he gave it without hesitation. His role as a forest ranger was not just a job, but a calling, rooted deep in his soul. Each dawn, Elias greeted the landscape from his lookout tower or set out on hours-long patrols along paths known only to him. He knew every bend of the Clearwater River, every hidden nook in the shadow of Sentinel Peak. He tracked the migrations of deer, the nesting of eagles on rocky cliffs, and the changing hues of foliage with the arrival of autumn. He could read tracks in the earth, interpret the language of the wind, and predict the weather by the behavior of animals. His was a life in harmony with nature, filled with quiet respect for its grandeur and unpredictability. He was the keeper of this wild land, its eyes and ears, its conscience. He loved it with all his heart, with all its dangers and promises. No words were needed to understand the forest. It was enough to simply be, to breathe the same air as ancient trees, to feel the pulse of the earth beneath his feet. But the spring and summer of 1999 brought something different. An unrelenting, merciless heat enveloped the North Cascades, scorching the earth to the hue of baked clay. Weeks without rain turned the once lush forest into a giant, flammable tinderbox. The crunch of dry pine needles under Elias's boots sounded like a warning, and the smell of parched needles and dust hung heavy in the air, weighing down every breath. He saw the forest change. Grass yellowed and crumbled, leaves on lower branches curled and became brittle. Streams that usually babbled even in the driest months dwindled to mere trickles or vanished entirely, leaving cracked streambeds behind. The air was still, heavy, and even the faintest breeze brought no relief, only carrying the dry heat from one patch to another. Wild animals, usually elusive, began behaving strangely. Deer, typically grazing gracefully in clearings, now darted about, their eyes filled with unease. Squirrels and chipmunks, normally busy with their tasks, froze on branches, listening intently. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, sensing something inevitable. By day, the sun blazed mercilessly, and even the nights offered no respite, only a stifling, fleeting calm. Elias felt the tension, the nervous anticipation permeating every bush and tree. He checked fire hydrants, cleared fire breaks, his movements precise and focused, but a heavy foreboding grew in his heart. He knew these signs. He had seen them before, and they always preceded disaster. This time, however, the feeling was stronger, weightier, as if the earth itself groaned under the heat. Then, one afternoon, as the sun reached its zenith, painting the sky a milky white, Elias saw it. On the distant horizon, above the ridge's peaks, a thin, almost innocent wisp of smoke rose. At first, it was barely noticeable, like a forgotten campfire, but Elias knew. His heart clenched at the sight. This was no tourist's fire, no harmless cloud. It was the breath of a future monster, the harbinger of a force that could consume his entire world. He raised his binoculars, his hand steady as he focused on the distant point. Even from afar, he could make out the ominous, rising column, growing slowly but relentlessly. It was the beginning of what seemed, at the time, like the end for acres of ancient forest. The fire erupted with a speed as if the drought had been waiting for a single spark to unleash its fury. Driven by sudden, ferocious winds that turned gentle gusts into raging torrents, it spread with insatiable greed. Flames leapt across ravines, climbed steep slopes, their tongues licking the crowns of ancient pines, turning them into blazing torches. The sky turned crimson and orange, the air thick with the acrid stench of smoke and char that stung the lungs and eyes, making every breath a struggle. The sounds were deafening, the crackle of burning wood, the crash of falling trunks, the unceasing roar of the fire itself, like a colossal beast breathing in their faces. Elias, among the first to arrive, worked tirelessly. His face blackened with soot, his lungs burning from inhaling hot air. Alongside other exhausted firefighters from across the state, he battled the untamed beast. They dug fire breaks to halt the fire's advance, felled trees to create barriers, and doused burning patches with water from portable pumps that seemed to hiss in defiance of the flames. Every minute was a battle, every decision a fight for the forest's survival. The shouts of commanders, the crack of burning timber, the roar of the fire merged into a cacophony of hell. Their strength waned, but no one dared stop. Too much was at stake, and the cost of inaction was unthinkable. Elias felt the searing pain in his muscles, the dizziness from smoke, but he pressed on, driven by stubborn resolve. He witnessed the panicked flight of wildlife. Deer, bears, foxes, all fled headlong, trying to escape the wall of flame. Their eyes were filled with terror, their movements chaotic. Some, crazed by smoke and fear, ran straight toward the firefighters. The smoke was so thick that Elias sometimes lost sight of comrades mere meters away, visibility dropping to a few steps. Ancient groves, centuries old, turned into charred skeletons, their mighty trunks blackened, their branches crumbling to ash. Once majestic trees, standing tall for generations, fell with a deafening crash, sending sparks and ash into the air. It was a heart-wrenching sight, an irreversible destruction that would alter the landscape for centuries. Elias felt the weight of this uncontrollable force pressing down on him. He, who had dedicated his life to protecting this forest, was now witnessing its slow, agonizing death. Every shovel strike, every sip of water, every breath was laced with despair and determination. In one moment, as the fire encircled their position with seemingly no escape, a memory flashed. A sunny day long ago when, as a boy, he first came to these mountains with his father. They sat by a clear stream, listening to birds that now likely perished in this blaze. Back then, the forest seemed endless, invincible, brimming with life and promise. That peaceful, distant image contrasted painfully with the hellish chaos around him, leaving a bitter aftertaste of a lost paradise. This image, peaceful and distant, flashed through his consciousness, creating a painful contrast with the surrounding hellish chaos, leaving a bitter aftertaste of a lost paradise. But Elias Thorne was not a man to dwell on what was lost. His very being was tethered to the present, to the urgent, burning need for action. His grandfather, Silas Thorne, had been one of the first to settle in this rugged corner of the North Cascades, a prospector and trapper who taught Elias not just how to survive in the wild, but how to listen to it. Silas spoke of the mountains as a living, breathing entity with its own moods and ancient wisdom. Elias remembered sitting by a crackling fire as a boy, Silas's weathered hand pointing to constellations, telling tales of great cougars and elusive wolf packs that roamed these peaks long before human settlements. His father, a logger, had continued the family tradition of working with the land, but Elias, driven by a deeper, almost spiritual connection, chose stewardship over extraction. He saw himself as a guardian, a silent sentinel for the wild heart of America. This profound heritage fueled his current struggle, transforming the fight against the fire into a deeply personal crusade. The drought had not merely dried the forest, it had fundamentally altered its essence, stripping away vibrant layers of life and replacing them with brittle fragility. The usual symphony of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of insects, the distant call of a hawk, was replaced by a hushed, almost fearful silence, broken only by the dry whisper of wind through parched needles. The ground, usually soft with centuries of decomposing matter, had become hard and unforgiving, cracking underfoot like baked clay. Every step Elias took kicked up clouds of fine red dust that coated his boots and clung to his lungs. The air, typically rich with the scent of damp soil, pine resin, and wild huckleberries, now carried only the acrid stench of desiccation, a premonition of the inferno to come. Even the light seemed harsher, a metallic glare that bleached vibrant greens into faded hues, making shadows sharper, more menacing. Elias watched, day by day, as life drained from the land, feeling a profound sorrow that echoed the silent suffering of the trees. He checked dwindling creek levels, observed deer desperately foraging for moisture, and noted the listless flight of birds. It was a slow, agonizing transformation, a prelude to the violence now consuming the landscape. The initial hours of the fire were a blur of frantic, coordinated chaos. Elias, a veteran of countless smaller blazes, had never seen anything on this scale. The incident command post, hastily set up near the logging town of Cedar Creek, buzzed with the roar of machinery, the crackle of radios, and shouted commands. Tanker planes streaked across the sky, leaving crimson trails of retardant that briefly held back the orange tide, only for the fire to surge forward moments later. Helicopters, like giant insects, dipped into reservoirs, lifting massive buckets of water to dump on the hottest spots, creating temporary plumes of steam and smoke. On the ground, fire crews from across the state and beyond worked grueling shifts, their faces grim, their movements precise but exhausted. Elias joined a crew from Oregon, a mix of eager recruits and seasoned veterans, united against a common enemy. They fought with hand tools, shovels, and Pulaskis, carving fire breaks, their muscles screaming. The heat was a tangible, oppressive force, radiating from the burning forest, making the air shimmer. Sparks rained down, igniting new spot fires, forcing a constant dance of defense and attack. The inferno's scale dwarfed their efforts, making victories fleeting and setbacks crushing. This fire, Elias realized, had a terrifying personality. It wasn't just spreading, it was thinking, adapting, defying every strategy. Fueled by relentless winds, it shifted direction suddenly, turning controlled flanks into roaring headfires, catching crews off guard and forcing retreats. It crowned frequently, leaping from treetop to treetop, turning the canopy into a river of flame faster than anyone could outrun. Fire whirls, miniature tornadoes of flame and smoke, erupted, sucking up debris and spewing embers miles away, igniting new blazes. These spot fires rendered fire breaks useless. Elias watched, horrified, as an updraft near Eagle's Roost Peak created a massive pyrocumulus cloud, generating its own lightning and sparking more fires. The inferno seemed almost malevolent, learning their tactics, exploiting every dry gulch and gust of wind. It was a primordial beast, its roar a constant declaration of dominance. The toll on Elias and his fellow firefighters was immense. Days bled into nights, marked only by the glow on the horizon and the wind's mournful howl. Sleep was stolen in short, fitful bursts on the hard ground, often interrupted by urgent radio calls or the fire's shifting roar. Their soot-streaked faces became masks of exhaustion, their eyes red-rimmed and haunted. Dehydration and smoke inhalation made throats raw, voices hoarse. The smell of smoke permeated everything, a constant reminder of the hell they inhabited. Elias, despite his age, pushed beyond his limits, his terrain knowledge guiding younger crews through treacherous landscapes. He saw despair in their eyes, moments of resignation, but also fierce determination. Small victories, a ridge held, a cabin saved, a favorable wind shift, were quickly overshadowed by the fire's relentless advance. Each fallen tree, each charred acre, was a blow to Elias's heart, a piece of his wilderness lost. He carried the weight of responsibility, grief, and desperate hope within his calloused heart. The plight of the wildlife was a heartbreaking spectacle etched into Elias's memory. It wasn't just an exodus, it was a series of individual tragedies. He saw a mother bear, her fur singed, ushering her cubs across a burning ridge, their whimpers audible over the flames. Disoriented birds crashed or fell, overcome by toxic air. A young fawn, separated from its mother, stumbled into their firebreak, trembling before being guided to safety. Smaller creatures, rabbits, squirrels, mice, had little chance, their burrows turning into ovens. The air was filled with frantic chirps, squeals, and cries of animals caught in the blaze. These were living beings, each a testament to the fire's brutal power. Elias, dedicated to protecting them, felt profound helplessness, a searing guilt that he couldn't save them all. A gnawing sense of futility settled in Elias's soul, threatening to extinguish his resolve. The fire mocked their efforts, leaping fire breaks, igniting from unseen embers. Iconic landmarks, the ancient ponderosa pine, Old Man Willow, the clear pools of Whispering Falls, were consumed, becoming memories. The destruction stretched for miles, an endless vista of smoke and flame. Elias thought of his grandfather, Silas, and his reverence for these mountains. Would Silas have given up? No, Elias knew, but Silas never faced a beast this immense. Elias muttered half prayers, half curses to the unfeeling sky, feeling a profound sense of failure, not just as a ranger, but as a human, unable to protect what he held sacred. His body screamed for rest, his mind was a haze, his spirit battered. He was at a breaking point when a radio report came, a secondary blaze in a dangerous canyon, threatening a vital wildlife escape route. It was a near-suicidal mission, but Elias volunteered without hesitation, driven by defiance, a desperate attempt to reclaim control, or simply his ingrained nature to protect, even when hope seemed lost. His mission was to assess this secondary blaze in Serpent's Coil, a narrow, smoke-choked canyon too treacherous for a full crew. The fire threatened to merge with the main front, endangering the pristine old-growth forest. Equipped with a Pulaski, a shovel, and a heavy heart, Elias navigated alone, the air thick with ash, the ground hot beneath his boots. Visibility was near zero, the roar of the fire vibrating through his bones. He moved cautiously, stepping over smoldering logs, skirting burning brush, seeking natural breaks to slow the blaze. It was a desperate endeavor, but he pressed on, hoping to save even a few acres. Alone in that fiery hell, his resolve was fueled by a lifetime of dedication to this wild, burning land. It was during this harrowing patrol in Serpent's Coil that Elias stumbled upon the hidden den. The air was a suffocating blanket of smoke, burning his eyes and lungs. The ground scorched through his boots. Navigating dense, old-growth cedar, he heard a faint whimper over the fire's roar, a sound of profound vulnerability. Freezing, his heart pounded with premonition. Pushing aside ferns, he found a small hollow, partially shielded by rock and fire-resistant roots. Inside, amidst smoldering debris and choking smoke, were 3 tiny wolf pups, no bigger than his hand, trembling, their milky blue eyes barely open. Their ash-matted fur and terrified whimpers pierced Elias's core. Their mother was gone, likely overcome by smoke, driven off by heat, or sacrificed to lure the fire away. The pups were moments from death, vulnerable in a landscape of destruction. The sight struck Elias like a blow, a primal chord in his weathered soul. His training urged him to leave them. Rangers didn't interfere with nature's brutal cycle, especially not with predators like wolves. To intervene was to tamper with the sacred balance he respected. Yet, kneeling in the searing heat, smoke clawing his throat, their helpless eyes dissolved his code. These weren't predators, but innocent beings facing a horrifying death. This was about mercy, a human response to suffering, transcending rules. He recalled freeing a snared deer years ago, against regulations, driven by its desperate eyes. This was different. An inferno made that snare seem trivial. Risking his life in this volatile area, adding 3 vulnerable lives seemed madness. But abandoning them felt like betraying his conscience and the wild he swore to protect. Their whimpers twisted his heart, their shivering bodies a cruel paradox in the fire-ravaged land. He knew they had mere minutes before the flames reached them. Without hesitation, instinct took over. Shedding his smoke-stained jacket, Elias gathered the trembling pups, their light bodies like damped fur and bone. He cradled them in the jacket, forming a protective pouch against the heat and smoke. Their whimpers softened, perhaps sensing his warmth. He felt their tiny hearts fluttering, a fragile rhythm of life amidst death. His retreat was a desperate dance with the flames. The path was obscured by new blazes, falling timber, and thick smoke. He battled burning undergrowth, fiery branches falling around him, showering sparks. Navigating ash-covered ground, he risked stepping into hidden embers. His senses, dulled by exhaustion, were pushed to their limits. He moved on adrenaline and primal determination, guided by old deer trails and hidden paths, coughing and choking but never stopping. The pup's whimpers were a constant reminder of the lives depending on him, an unspoken vow forged in the heart of the fire. Several times he thought he was lost. Thick smoke disoriented him, turning the familiar landscape into a terrifying maze. He pressed against cool rock faces, listening for the wind or a distant creek to guide him. A blazing ponderosa crashed yards ahead, sending sparks across his path. He shielded the pups, the heat searing his back. Another time, his foot sank into smoldering ash, burning through his boot. He stumbled but pressed on, driven by the fragile lives in his arms.